Hi, I'm Ros Allwood and I'm curator of this exhibition, Camden Town to Garden City, Gilman, Gore and Ratcliffe. And I'm really pleased to be able to give a quick introduction to this amazing exhibition, because we've borrowed paintings from all over the country, from really prestigious museums like the Tate, the Ashmolean, National Museum of Wales, Leeds, Liverpool, Government Art Collection, Southampton, lots of private lenders. So it's a really special exhibition, and it's the first time in well over 100 years since these paintings were originally painted that they've all come back to North Hertfordshire. So, why is this exhibition called Camden Town to Garden City? It's because Camden Town was the Camden Town group of 16 young artists, and it was formed in 1911. These were some of the most progressive and modern artists of the day in this country. And our three painters, Harold Gilman, Spencer Gore and William Ratcliffe, were all founder members of the Camden Town group. So that's why we've called it Camden Town. Garden City is, of course, the Letchworth Garden City, the first garden city in the world, where our three artists all came to live for varying amounts of time. William Ratcliffe came first and really stayed the longest, on and off. Harold Gilman came to the Garden City with his young family as a healthy place for the new family to live. And Spencer Gore came to the Garden City just for a few months in 1912, borrowing Harold Gilman's house, and he painted some of his most important work in Letchworth Garden City. So that's really how the title of the exhibition has come about. Now, Letchworth was founded in 1903, and it was the world's first garden city. And the idea was that it was somewhere that would give you the best features of a town, like social life and jobs, and the best features of the country. It was a healthy place full of flowers, and so it was, lots of nature and so on. So the best of both worlds. And so this new town attracted quite a lot of creative people. It attracted artists, it attracted musicians, also poets and writers, as well as people who came for the industry there. And as I say, artists particularly, Letchworth had more houses, new houses built with artist studios attached, I think, than anywhere I've ever come across. Letchworth was a town that attracted idealists, people who wanted to build a new life outside smoky, grimy London or the other major cities. One of these artists was Harold Gilman. So Gilman had trained at the Slade School of Art. After art school, he'd been to Madrid. He copied paintings in the Prado, and he met his American wife, Grace, there. In the first few years of their married life, they lived in Dieppe, where they met Sickert, who was a very well-known artist and influential in the Camden Town group. Then they lived in the States, where Grace's parents were. They came back and they lived in London in various flats. They had two little girls, and they had a son, Richard, who sadly died in a scarlet fever epidemic. And I think that's probably what made them want to leave London and come to Letchworth, which, as I said, was seen as a very healthy place to live. So they moved to Letchworth, and they commissioned a new arts and crafts house from Barry Parker, who was one of the main arts and crafts architects. While their house was being built, they lived in a small cottage on West Home Green, and we think this is where this painting was painted. This shows their maidservant, Lily, in the kitchen. And what's interesting about a painting like this is that in around 1908, when it was painted, this would have been seen as not at all acceptable to be shown somewhere like the Royal Academy. So it was seen as slightly, not exactly deviant, but wrong to paint servants and kitchens. They weren't really thought of as suitable subjects for exhibition by the more conservative members of the art establishment. But the painter Sickert said, the more our art is serious, the more it will leave the drawing room and stick to the kitchen. And that is exactly what Gilman is doing here. The other two paintings on this wall show portraits by Gilman of Garden City women. This one here is called Meditation, and this shows Barry Parker, the architect Barry Parker's sister-in-law, Senior, and she was a Swedish woman, and really, this painting doesn't, I think, do her character justice, because she was a strong suffragette. She was a gymnast. She taught remedial gymnastics and massage, and was clearly quite a strong character, and had 3 daughters, all of whom became artists. The final large Gilman portrait is called The Blue Blouse, and this shows a very confident young woman, Eleni Zompolides. Eleni was a trained calligrapher and bookbinder. She trained at the Royal College of Art, and she came as a single young working woman, which in its own way was actually, quite a brave thing to do at this time, when women were meant to give up their jobs once they got married. She came to work with the country's leading bookbinder, Douglas Cockerell, who had moved to Letchworth, and she worked for W.H. Smith and Dent's. There were a number of printing companies who came to set up in the new Garden City. And we're very lucky because we have, as well as the portrait of her, we actually have some of her work in the showcase, examples of her calligraphy and her bookbinding. So I mentioned that Harold Gilman married an American, Grace, who was also an artist. And we see her here in this drawing. In fact, all these drawings have been lent by a private collection, and they've never ever been on display before. So it's a fantastic opportunity to see these rather lovely Gilman drawings. So Grace and Harold Gilman had 3 children, but Grace became very ill, seriously ill, with pernicious anemia. And her father, back in the States, said that he would pay for her and the children to go back home so that she could recover in the sunshine and have proper, good quality medical care. So this is what happened. The Grace and the children sailed on the Lusitania from Liverpool. But very sadly, once they got back to America, her father said that he wasn't going to give her the money to come back, because he felt that Harold Gilman should give up his painting and settle down, come to America, do a job with him, and perhaps just paint part-time in the evenings. And that just wasn't going to happen. Harold Gilman couldn't really give up his art. Grace did not want to ask him to give up his painting, and she was desperate to get home with the children, and there are tragically sad letters in the Tate archive about how trapped she felt in America, but yet there was no way she could get back. And meanwhile, Harold Gilman's mother was writing to Grace's father saying, please, this young couple, they should be back together in the new house in Letchworth they're having built. Can't you see your way to giving them the money? And Grace's father was writing back saying, no, I'm really sorry. He needs to man up and come over here and once he can prove to me he can take care of the children and the family, fair enough. But sadly, that didn't happen, and Harold Gilman never saw Grace and the children again. When Grace and the children went back to America, Harold Gilman really didn't stay in Letchworth terribly long afterwards. He was very depressed and he was often quite ill, but he went back to London, and he rented out a new house on the Wilbury Road that he had built for the family and which they never actually lived in. And this is the house, and one of the people he rented it to was his artistic colleague, Spencer Gore, who had also trained at the Slade, and they were great friends, Gore and Gilman. And Spencer Gore and his wife came to this house, Harold Gilman's house, and Spencer Gore painted some of his most progressive works while he was staying in Letchworth for 4 months in 1912. So this one is called Harold Gilman's house. The one behind me is called Letchworth the Road, and you can see already that if you look at the clouds, they're kind of quite impressionistic, getting always towards a bit cubist. The next painting here, which has been lent by the Tate, is called The Beanfield, and if you look at this with the rows of beans, they're just in a zigzag. It's really very abstracted compared with most paintings of this date. So this is a really one of Spencer Gore's most modern paintings that he ever made. And then the final painting in this little section is another view of Harold Gilman's house. It's a lovely picture, which is actually owned by the Government Art Collection, and it goes to embassies around the world. So this one's come back from Copenhagen for the exhibition. And you can see again, it's kind of almost the forms of quite abstracted, very, very simple forms that Spencer Gore has used here, and the lovely little detail of the cat on the path. So Spencer Gore spent 4 months in Letchworth with his wife, and his son was born in the new Garden City. Then they moved out back to London, to Richmond. But sadly, when he was sketching in Richmond Park in 1914, he caught pneumonia and he died. He was only in his mid-30s, and that was a great shock to the whole artistic community, because he was very well respected and much loved young artist, and it was a real tragedy for British art. And sadly, Harold Gilman also died young. Harold Gilman died in the post-World War I influenza, looking after another Camden Town school artist called Gina. So my final artist of the three is William Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe was slightly older than Gilman and Gore. He was, I think, 38 when he came to Letchworth, and the others were more in their early 30s. William Ratcliffe came to the new Garden City first. He arrived in 1907. He had trained actually as a wallpaper designer and worked in Manchester and then down in London designing wallpapers. And it seems that he came to the Garden City to work as a graphic designer, where he designed postcards like these for the Garden City Press. And as you can see, they're quite competent, but they're not anything particularly special. But Harold Gilman happened to live very near William Ratcliffe in this row of cottages in Westholme Green in Letchworth, which was a new green of small arts and crafts cottages. And it was pure coincidence that Gilman and Ratcliffe both ended up there. And Harold Gilman obviously saw something in William Ratcliffe, which I think you couldn't really guess from looking at these, but he saw a potential and suggested that Ratcliffe go to evening classes in London, evening art classes at the Slade, which he did do. And his style very quickly came on, and he became, by 1911, one of the founder members of the Camden Town group. So this painting here is the first oil in the exhibition by William Ratcliffe, and it is an example of how different his work was once Gilman had become his mentor. It's called In the Sun, and it's probably the painting that was called Sunshine that was exhibited in the second Camden Town exhibition in 1911. And it shows a nursemaid in a house in Letchworth, or in the garden of the house in Letchworth. And what's interesting is to see the way that William Ratcliffe has built up the picture with lots of little touches of colour, lots of little touches of oil paint. And this was a technique used by quite a number of the Camden Town artists, but William Ratcliffe wrote that he actually got it from Lucien Pissarro, who was the son of the famous Impressionist painter Pissarro. But Lucien had come to England and was actually a member of the Camden Town group, and so quite a friend to William Ratcliffe. And Ratcliffe says that sometimes he used to go over canvases 5 times doing little dots of colour to build up the painting, which at the time was described by one of the reviewers as like a mosaic, building up a mosaic of colour. And you can see that very clearly in this painting by Ratcliffe. And we can also see it in this one by Ratcliffe, which is the year after, 1912, and this is called Clarence Gardens, and shows a corner of a square in North London near Camden Town, near where so many of these Camden Town painters actually lived. And Gilman lived here for a time, and Gilman also did a painting of Clarence Gardens. And quite often it seems where Gilman painted something, then William Ratcliffe, kind of rather like his student, would copy him, not copy the painting, but do a painting of the same subject. This painting by William Ratcliffe is called The Window, and it's a very good example of how the Camden Town school artists often use this kind of mauve, purpley mauve colours, particularly for the shadows. And at the time, Ratcliffe and a couple of the others were described as having the disease of purplitis. And I think this painting shows that very well. It's a really lovely picture, and it's one that we bought for North Herts Museum with money from the Art Fund and from the V&A and Arts Council grant aid and the Hertfordshire Heritage Fund. We are very fortunate in often receiving grant aid from grant funds like the Art Fund, and without them we wouldn't have the paintings we do. In fact, without the Art Fund we would not have this exhibition. In 1913, William Ratcliffe went with the Stanley Parker family. So Stanley was one of the brothers of Barry Parker, the Garden City architect. Stanley was possibly William Ratcliffe's closest friend, and Ratcliffe spent much of his life, actually, once he had decided to become a painter and give up graphic design, staying with the Parker family in their house, because he never really earned very much. He never seemed to have sold many paintings. He wasn't terribly bothered about selling pictures, and he stayed with his brother in Hampstead Garden suburb, and he stayed with the Parker family, and he often didn't have enough money to even rent a little tiny room and bedsit. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes, we gather, he actually swapped paintings for things like his dental work. He'd pay his dentist in paintings because he just didn't have much income at all. Anyway, so in 1913, he travelled with the Parker family to the family estate of Stanley Parker's wife, Senior, her brother, in Sweden. And this is one of the paintings he made while he was in Sweden. It was a very good time for William Ratcliffe. He painted quite a number of oils and also some very lovely and delicate watercolours. And he really used the months to kind of come on as an artist. And so we are very fortunate in being able to borrow this. This is from a private collection, this painting of part of the Sundsom estate in Sweden. This painting here is possibly William Ratcliffe's best known painting. It's called The Coffee House, East Finchley, and it's actually in Southampton Art Gallery. But the oil painting of Southampton, normally, we've borrowed it. The little sketch here we have at North Herts Museum, and it's so interesting to see the two together because Ratcliffe made little notes on the sketches, and we know that he used to walk over the fields from his brother's house in Hampstead Garden suburb while he was making this painting for quite a few days. He records that he went into this coffee house and sat down, and he saw this big mirror here and thought that would be a good subject for a painting. And so he made notes like this one while he was actually in the coffee house, and they're really interesting little tiny notes about the colours, saying things like, note the difference in tone between the mirror and the actual room, and the red must shine, and we see the shiny red there of the red blinds on the window, and the green, warm green, so on. So and it's a lovely painting, this one. And so you can see the window here, the mirror here, and this is the window actually of the coffee house, which has since been demolished. This large painting here is called Manor Farm, Norton, and shows the courtyard of a building that belonged to one of the other Parker brothers, Roger Parker. And again, he would have been a friend of William Ratcliffe through Stanley Parker and Barry Parker. This painting was given to Letchworth Museum in 1954 because that year Letchworth Museum gave William Ratcliffe the only solo exhibition he ever had, and that was the year before his death at age 85 in 1955. Ratcliffe had one previous exhibition in 1946 in London, which he shared with a more modern artist called Joseph Herman. Sadly, Ratcliffe sold hardly anything from the 1946 exhibition. He was showing paintings like the window that we saw earlier that had been done, in the 1910, 11, 12, 13, 14. So by 1946, they just all looked really old-fashioned. And somebody wrote about him, "The poor old man is sad, thinking of the bill for the framing," because he didn't have an income. He couldn't have an exhibition without framing the works. He framed them, and then, they just didn't sell, which was really sad. Anyway, 1954, he had the second exhibition at Letchworth Museum. He didn't underprice himself. Quite a lot of the works were 50 guineas, which is a lot of money in the mid-1950s. And again, he didn't sell very much. But after the exhibition, as a thank you, he gave this painting to Letchworth Museum. And also, we have a number of the drawings for it. And this is one here. And I like this one particularly because you can see in the barn, there's somebody actually sitting at an easel, working at an easel, which actually has changed slightly in the finished oil. And I think it shows his interest in pattern design, which of course, being a wallpaper designer, is not surprising. The way he's done all the different tiles and the roof tiles and the different textures. And again, like the coffee house painting, it's a very quiet, his people are very still, very quiet. He often, in his watercolours, if he drew people, he often sometimes even just rubbed them out. He wasn't a portrait painter, William Ratcliffe. I think, he found painting people quite difficult. But here, it really sums up this Edwardian middle class people taking their tea. So this painting is called The Red Curtain, and this shows a corner of Stanley Parker's house, the house in Letchworth where William Ratcliffe spent really many years on and off throughout his life with the Parker family. And I'd like to quote from the catalogue, because Lord Chris Smith, who's chair of the Art Fund, very kindly wrote a little bit for the catalogue for us, and he says, "Amongst the paintings on display in this wonderful exhibition is the work The Red Curtain, which was acquired by the museum, I'm delighted to say, with help from the Art Fund, a few years ago, and perfectly demonstrates the strengths of this group of painters. It shows a corner of the large open-plan living room in the very house where he lived, in the New Garden City, and where from time to time a group of like-minded artists would gather. It beautifully portrays the arts and crafts interior, and the arts and crafts nature of much of the New Garden City was one of its glories. There's a built-in settle covered with a patterned rug, oriental carpets on the floor, a rush-seated ladder-back chair, and then, of course, the red curtain itself, slightly diaphanous, but bringing a flash of focused colour to the whole. The painting perfectly reflects the secret of arts and crafts interior design, every item individual, but all cohering together harmoniously." And I think that sums up the painting beautifully. And we are also very fortunate in our catalogue to have Sir Michael Palin also very kindly wrote for us a little bit about the Camden Town painters, because he also really likes these painters. And as he says, the real joy of the Camden painters is their intimacy and their honesty. And what I find so appealing in their work is the attention to detail. There's no grand effect. They show us with honesty and precision the fine detail of everyday life at the turn of the 20th century. They show us interiors which would often have been dismissed as too ordinary or too shabby for serious painters' attention. Apart from being beautiful works in themselves, they offer a wonderfully vivid snapshot of our social and cultural history. What people washed in, what crockery they used, how they decorated their rooms. All this elevated and emphasised by the artist's eye. They are very English paintings. They move me most of all because I recognise a truth there. They have captured a corner of English life in a way few others tried, and they should be treasured for that. So thank you, Michael Palin. Thank you, Chris Smith, for writing about this painting and about the exhibition, because it is a very special exhibition, and we're so grateful to the Art Fund and also to another fund, the Paul Mellon Foundation, for helping, well, actually not helping, but for paying for the catalogue, for giving us a grant. The Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art kindly gave us a grant which enabled us to have this very lovely catalogue for the exhibition with some essays and all the paintings illustrated in colour. So again, we're so grateful to Grant Aid and of course to all the lenders to this exhibition.